Hello, friends. My name is Dr. Mark Sandoval, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. I am the president of New Paradigm Ministries, where we seek to bring life to people in bondage. That's living free, improving relationships, finding purpose, and experiencing health. So we are going to be looking at information that's contained in the book, The Law of Life. And this information, I guarantee, is going to turn your world upside down. We are going to look at things from a different perspective that will help us to find purpose and meaning, that will help us to find solutions where we only saw problems before, and will really help us to understand why we function the way that we do, why do we respond and react the way that we do, why is it that we end up with disease, why is it that we have relationship problems, why is it that we struggle with personal mental health challenges and so on, and bringing this all together into an understanding, a paradigm that helps us to come to freedom. The Law of Life, if you're not familiar with it, there's a book, there's a video series on this station. The Law of Life is a concept that is a biblical concept, but it's not well understood. And that concept, when you understand it, it takes your world and turns it upside down. And then you begin to see things in a different way, and you're like, oh, wow. I never saw it that way. And because you never saw it that way, you never looked for a solution in that way. But now you begin to find solutions where you only found problems before. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your blessings, and thank you for this day that you provided. We thank you for the opportunities that you have given. And Lord, we recognize that none of this stuff will work without you. And really the purpose is to reach hearts and lives, and for there to be a transformation, for people to be saved in your kingdom. And that can't happen without you either. And so while we are doing the human and technical parts of things, Lord, we ask for you to do that which we absolutely cannot, and that is to attract individuals and to help them to encounter the materials and bring about your conviction in their lives that they might be saved in your kingdom, and that the number of your kingdom might be completed. And this we pray in Jesus' name, and we thank you for helping us and energizing us and providing us with your Spirit at this time. In Jesus' name, amen. Hello, friends. My name is Dr. Mark Sandoval, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. I am the president of New Paradigm Ministries, where we seek to bring life to people in bondage. That's living free, improving relationships, finding purpose, and experiencing health. And it is my joy and my purpose to be able to bring you information that will help to set you free. And in this series of presentations, we are going to be looking at information that's contained in the book, The Law of Life. And this information, I guarantee, is going to turn your world upside down. We are going to look at things from a different perspective that will help us to find purpose and meaning, that will help us to find solutions where we only saw problems before, and will really help us to understand why we function the way that we do, why do we respond and react the way that we do, why is it that we end up with disease, why is it that we have relationship problems, why is it that we struggle with personal mental health challenges, and so on, and bringing this all together into an understanding, a paradigm that helps us to come to freedom. So as we begin and as we enter into this presentation, then we want to begin with the topic, treating the cause. Treating the cause. I am interested as a physician in helping individuals to be free from the conditions that they suffer from. And that freedom necessitates understanding what the cause is. Now, it's true that individuals have symptoms, and those symptoms help you to understand that there's a problem, but if all we do is treat the symptoms, we're never going to be able to really fix the problem. We have to understand what the cause is. Unfortunately, the healthcare industry as a whole doesn't understand the cause. And so it's impossible for us in that context to really come to a solution. So the question that I have for you is, do you know what the cause of disease is? Do you know what's the cause of cancer? Do you know what is the cause of diabetes? Do you know what is the cause of coronary artery disease that leads to heart attacks? Well, if you don't know what the cause is, what are you going to do about it? We need to understand the cause so that we can successfully treat and remove the cause. Otherwise, we're not really going to fix the problem. So in seeking to understand this, we're going to look at an analogy, and the analogy is going to be a tree. Something simple. We're all familiar with trees. In this case, we have a fruit tree. And the fruit tree is in fruit season. And you'll notice that on the tree there are some bad fruit and bad leaves. Those bad fruit and bad leaves, if you have a tree that has bad fruit and bad leaves, well, one thing that you could do is you could pluck off the bad fruit and the bad leaves, and the manifestation of the problem is gone, but did that take care of the cause of the problem? Well, the answer is no. It didn't take care of the cause of the problem, because the cause is deeper than just where the diseased fruit and the diseased leaves are. It goes deeper than that. Now, when it comes to health and humans, those bad fruit and bad leaves represent symptoms. Symptoms are things like pain and coughing and itching and weakness and fatigue and nausea and other things of that nature, things that we're all familiar with. And when you have symptoms, symptoms are there because there's a problem. Now, the symptoms themselves are not the problem. They're just the sign or the manifestation that there is a problem. And how do we usually treat symptoms? Well, we usually treat symptoms with pills. There's a pill for every ill. Whether that's a pill that you get from a pharmacy or whether that's a pill that you get from a health food store or something of that nature, whether it's a pharmaceutical or it's an herb or something of that nature, we tend to take something to take care of the symptoms that we are suffering from. So let's just imagine that you have pain in your back, and it's right there in the middle of your back, and it's just excruciating, and it came on suddenly, and oh, you can't lay on your back, and it's just horrible. And so you take a pill, whatever it is, and pain reliever over the counter, and it helps take just the slight edge off of it, but it's really painful. So you go in the next day and you see the doctor, and the doctor gives you a prescription for a stronger pain medication, and you're taking that. Plus, you didn't tell him, but you're still taking the over-the-counter medication. And so now you're taking both of these, and the pain's a little bit better, but you still can't lay on your back. It's still excruciating. You go back to the doctor again, and they give you a stronger pain medication, and so you take that, and, well, yeah, it's helping a little bit more, but it's still there, and it's still painful. And so you end up getting a second opinion. You go to another doctor or nurse practitioner or PA or something like that, and they check you out, and they actually do an exam, and they find out there's a reason that you have back pain, right? You've got a knife in your back. So did the pain medication take care of the problem? Well, no, it didn't take care of the problem. It can't. All it can do is take care of your perception of the problem. Right? It can only take care of the symptoms. Now, that's not to say that it's bad to take a pain medication if you have a knife in your back, right? You know, if you cut off your finger, have some kind of trauma, well, you know, praise God that there's something that you can take that can help out with the pain, but the thing that you take doesn't fix the problem. The problem lies deeper than that, right? So the fruit and the leaves represent symptoms, and but the fruit and the leaves, they don't support themselves. They don't grow by themselves. What do the fruit and the leaves grow on? Well, they grow on the branches, and the branches represent our behaviors. What we act, how we do. Essentially, it's what you do in order to stay alive. It's your breathing, it's your drinking, it's your eating, it's your exposure, it's your exercise, and so on. These behaviors are simple things that are necessary behaviors for you in order for you to live, right? And if your behaviors are good, if you have a tree that has good branches, well, you're going to end up with good fruit and good leaves on it. If the branches are bad, then you're going to end up with bad fruit and bad leaves, right? Well, the same thing here with the behaviors. If you have good behaviors, if you're breathing well, you're drinking well, you're eating well, and so on, well, that's going to promote good symptoms. But if the behaviors are not good, then the symptoms are not going to be good either, at least at some point in time. But do the branches live by themselves? Well, no, the branches don't live by themselves. The branches grow off of what? Well, they grow off of the trunk. And the trunk represents your needs, right? Everybody needs something. Everybody needs a lot of different somethings. And if you are the same creature, for example, a human being, then what you need is the same as what somebody else needs. Maybe not in the exact same quantity, but you need the same thing. For example, we as human beings need oxygen. We need water. We need food, right? And those needs you can't change. If you have a tree and the trunk is bad, there's not a lot that you can do about it except cut the thing off. Right? There's not much that you can do to treat it. And the same thing is true with humans when it comes to our needs. You can't do much about your needs. I mean, you need what you need, and you can't not need what you need. You can't just decide one day, oh, I don't need oxygen, or I don't need water, or I don't need food. I mean, you can decide that, but if you stop breathing, or you stop drinking, or you stop eating, you're going to recognize that you can't live without those things. And you can't change what you need. What you need is dependent upon what you are, and you can't change what you are, so you can't change what you need. So, in the whole balance of things, remember when you were a child and you played on a teeter-totter? Well, that teeter-totter, you know, you might have one child on one side, the other child on the other side, and in the middle, where that teeter-totter goes back and forth, but where it doesn't move in the middle, that's the fulcrum. Right? That's the fulcrum. And so things move around that point. Well, when it comes to humans, the fulcrum is our needs. Our needs never change. That stays the same. And so everything else needs to balance around that fulcrum point in order for us to then have health. So you need oxygen. Why do you breathe? You breathe because you need oxygen. Why do you drink? You drink because you need water. Why do you eat? You eat because you need food. Right? These are things that you need. You can't not need those. So if your behaviors match your needs so that it supplies what you need, then that's going to promote healthy fruit and healthy leaves. That's going to have good symptoms. But if your behaviors do not match your needs, then well, things are going to get difficult, right? You're going to end up having deficiencies, excesses. Things are just not going to function the way that they're supposed to. If you have a tree that has bad fruit and bad leaves, the problem's not in the leaves and it's not in the fruit. It's really not in the branches either, and the problem's really not in the trunk. If you want to know what the problem is with the tree, and it's got bad fruit and bad leaves, where do you have to look? That's right. You've got to look underground. You've got to dig. You've got to find out what's going on in the soil. It's what's below the ground that is the real issue. And in our analogy of the tree, where we've got symptoms, behaviors, and needs, well, what is it that the trunk grows out of? Well, it grows out of the roots. That's right. It grows out of the roots. And the roots represent our beliefs. How do you understand what somebody believes. I mean, somebody's beliefs is, you don't necessarily know what somebody believes, right? It's something that's underground. You got to dig in order to find out. Just like if you want to know what's going on with the roots of a tree, you got to dig. And so you have to ask questions and for them to answer and see them behave and so on. How you will know what somebody believes is how they behave, because the behaviors come out of the beliefs. You do what you do because you believe what you believe. And so if your beliefs match your needs, then your behaviors will supply what you need, and you'll end up with healthy fruit and healthy leaves, good symptoms. But if your beliefs do not match with your needs, then your behaviors are not going to supply what you need, and you're going to end up with bad fruit and bad leaves. Let's take an example. Do you need Dr. Pepper? Well, the answer is no, you don't need Dr. Pepper. But Dr. Pepper does have water, and you need water. Dr. Pepper does have sugar, and sugar is part of food, part of the nutrients that you need. Probably not in that form as the best that it, it's not the best way. Anyways, but you don't need Dr. Pepper, you need water. And you need food, and you need good food. So if you believe that you need Dr. Pepper, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to drink Dr. Pepper. That's right. But if you don't need it and you drink it, then you're supplying something that you don't need, so you're not meeting your needs. Is that going to end up with good fruit and good leaves, or bad fruit and bad leaves? Well, it's going to end up with bad fruit and bad leaves. That's right. Now, what if you believe that you need water? Do you need water? Sure. Well, that's great. What if you believe that you need 5 gallons of water to drink every day? Well, if you believe that, then you're at least going to try that. And if you get anywhere close to that, it's going to kill you, because you don't need that much water. That's way too much. You'll die if you drink that much water. More than, well, even a single day, it could potentially kill you if you drank that much water. But you don't need that much. And so if your beliefs do not match with what your needs are, then your behaviors are not going to provide what your needs are, and you're going to end up with bad fruit and bad leaves, bad symptoms, right? It's just not going to work. So in order for this to work, your beliefs have to match your needs. Your behaviors then supply what you need, and then you can have healthy fruit and healthy leaves. But there's one more thing. If you are somebody who takes care of trees, and your tree is diseased, and you notice that there's bad spots on it and so on, what is it that you're actually going to fix? Are you going to fix the branches? Well, you can prune, and that's okay. It helps to decrease the burden of disease, but it doesn't fix the problem. You can't, there's not much that you can do to the trunk. Do you actually do surgery on the roots? Well, if it was in a pot and it was root bound, yes, you could break them apart and so that they're not growing into each other. But if it's planted in the ground, there's not a lot that you do to the roots either. What do you fix? You fix the soil. That's right. You fix the soil. And the soil represents our sources. Right? It represents the things that we have as our source that we take from. If the source is bad, for example, you have a polluted source of water. Well, you can believe that you need water, and you can believe that you need the right amount of water, but if the source of water that you're taking in is polluted, then your behavior of drinking that water will also not just bring in the water, it will bring in the pollution or the poison with it, and then you'll end up with bad symptoms and so on. So you have to have a good source. You have to believe according to your needs, then your behaviors bring in what you need, and then you'll end up with good fruit and good leaves. And we need all of that working together in order for us to then function well. Right? All of that comes together to function well. Now, when we think of needs, there's something else that each of us needs. It is love. Every one of us needs love. I have traveled to many countries on several continents, and I have asked many thousands of people this question. Is there anybody here that does not need love? And honestly, besides 2 14-year-old boys who raised their hand at 2 separate occasions, who were raising their hand because they wanted attention, which is a source of part of love, everybody agrees that they need love. Everybody needs love, right? So love, just like oxygen, water, and food, and the other needs that you have, love is a need that you have because of what you are. You're a human being. And you can't change that need. You can't change the fact that you need love or not. Everything that you need comes from where? Where does the oxygen and the water and the food come from? Do you get the oxygen from inside of you to breathe so that you can stay alive? Well, no, of course not. Do you get the water from inside of you so that you can drink, so that you can stay alive? Well, no. Do you get the food from inside of you? I mean, that would be like eating your fingers so that you could stay alive and eating the rest of you so you could stay alive. Is that going to work? Well, no, that's not going to work. Everything you need comes from outside of you, and everything that you need must be brought in. That's what your behaviors are for. Breathing is there so that you can bring in the oxygen that's outside of you. Drinking is there so that you can bring in the water that's outside of you. Eating is there so you can bring in the food that's outside of you. So, do you need love? Yes, you need love. Where does love come from? Does it come from within you, or does it come from outside of you? Well, it comes from outside of you. And it is you that must bring it in by your own actions, by your own behaviors. But the question is, what is the action or what is the behavior that brings in love? That's a good question. What is it? Well, it is thinking. It is thinking that is the action that brings in love. You might say, well, how is that? Well, let's imagine that you were having a not so good day, and you stopped on your way home, and you stopped at the mailbox, and you got the mail out, and you noticed that there was a letter, and it was a handwritten letter, and you noticed the name on it, and that was a good name. And they have written to you, and so you open the letter, and it says, "Dear so-and-so, I'm looking forward to the next time that we get to spend together. I enjoyed the last time that we were, that we got to spend together and talking to you and getting to know you better," and so on, and whatever, and at the end they sign, "Love so-and-so." Huh? So how do you feel after that kind of letter? And it was from the right person. It wasn't the used car salesman downtown. Right? It was somebody that you know and that you care about. Well, how do you feel afterwards? Well, you feel loved. Well, how much love was in the ink? How much love was in the paper? How much love was in the glue? Well, none. So how is it that you had a letter that had no love in it, but now after you're done reading it, you have love? Well, that letter contains information. It's written in language and so on, and you decipher that information that's there, and you come to assign a meaning to that, and the meaning is love. And when you understand that that meaning of the letter is love, and you believe it, you accept it, then you have the love. Right? And that process of evaluation and deciphering, that's all a process of thought. So the action that brings in love that we need in order to live by is thought. It's thinking. So how many of you like pain? And how many like disease? Well, none of us do. But is the function of pain and disease a good function, or is it a bad function? Well, let's look at it. Leprosy is an infection. It's a result of an infection of a certain type of bacteria, and that bacteria loves to grow in areas that are cool. And so it tends to concentrate in places like fingers and toes and hands and feet and nose and ears and so on, cooler places of the body. And not only does it set up an infection, but it starts affecting the nerves in those areas so that an individual can't feel as well as they did before until they get to the point where they can't really feel anything at all. Well, what happens? Well, if you're a squeamish individual and you don't like somewhat gruesome pictures, then you can just close your eyes and I'll describe things for the next slide. If you don't mind, then you'll see that these are the fingers of a leper. Why do the fingers look that way? Well, because they don't have a sensation of pain. Now, if you stick your hand on the burner of the stove, well, you're going to pull it off right away because you have a sensation of pain, and you're going to retract away from that area of pain so that you don't damage yourself so much. But if it's a leper and they put their hand on the oven, on the stove, then they're not going to pull their hand away until they start smelling the burned flesh, because they can't feel it when their hand's on there. And so they end up damaging themselves, and then they start losing fingers and losing hands and losing toes and losing feet because they just don't have the sensation of pain to tell them that there's a problem so that they can get away from the problem. So is the function of pain a good function? Well, yes, it is. And the question that we can ask also is the function of disease a good function? And the answer is yes, it is a good function. Why? Because both pain and disease let us know something is wrong. Something's wrong, right? So does disease just come out of thin air, or is there a cause for it? Well, yes, there's a cause, but the question is, what is the cause? What's the cause of disease? Well, in order to understand that, we need to be able to reason from cause to effect. Let's take high blood pressure as our example, hypertension. It's common. We all know about it. Many people experience it and so on. Where does hypertension come from? Well, what's the cause of it? Okay, well, it's caused because of the muscles in the blood vessels clamping down, and when they clamp down on the blood that's inside of them, then it increases the pressure in the blood. Well, that's called vasoconstriction. So if you increase vasoconstriction, then you increase blood pressure, and if it increases to a high enough level, then you call it hypertension or high blood pressure. Well, what's the cause of vasoconstriction? It's true that causes have causes. It's like a domino chain, right? You have one domino that goes and it becomes the cause of the next domino falling over, and then that one becomes the cause of the next domino falling over, and so on and so forth. But really, when we're talking about cause and effect, we're not talking about just the next domino here that's knocking the next one over. What we really want to understand is, what's the first domino? What's the first domino? Because that ultimately is the cause. So vasoconstriction, what's the cause of vasoconstriction? Well, the blood vessels are under the control of the sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight system. And when that sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, then you end up getting vasoconstriction. Okay, well, what's the cause of the sympathetic nervous system being stimulated? Well, it can be a thought of fear that releases epinephrine and norepinephrine, or adrenaline and noradrenaline, if you know it by those terms, and it's stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system and this vasoconstriction that happens. But it's also by the production of leptin in the hypothalamus. Now, leptin is a hormone that's released from fat cells in the body. And the more fat those fat cells become, then the more leptin that is produced. And leptin stimulates the hypothalamus, which is the primary controller of your automatic functions that happen in the body, including the constriction of the blood vessels and your blood pressure. So high leptin levels can lead to sympathetic nervous system stimulation, which leads to vasoconstriction and high blood pressure. Well, that's great. Well, what's the cause of leptin, high leptin levels? Well, it's caused by increased adipose tissue, increased fat. Right. So the more fat tissue you have, the bigger the fat cells become. Now, fat cells don't grow so much in number, they grow in size, and so the bigger and the bigger and the bigger they get, it's more difficult to manage the function of those cells. And so one of the SOS signals that's sent off by the fat cells as they keep getting bigger and bigger because you eat more and more, is leptin. And one of the things that leptin does is it stimulates the sympathetic nervous system that leads to hypertension. Another thing that it does is it decreases your appetite, and another thing that it does is it increases your metabolic rate. But unfortunately, the appetite issue suppression and the metabolic rate increase that comes from the leptin only lasts for a certain period of time, and then it drops off. But this effect on the blood vessels and the sympathetic nervous system stimulation, vasoconstriction, and hypertension, that doesn't go away. So where does increased adipose tissue come from? What's the cause of that? Well, it's because of excess calories. You have more calories that you're bringing out in to the body than you're getting rid of. Calories are only a measure of energy, but certain foods have more energy in it per weight of food that you eat. It's called calorie density. Fats, quite calorie dense, 9 calories per gram of fat. Carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram, and proteins have the same. So the higher fat and the higher sugar and so on, well, that's gonna increase your calorie density. Well, so that the increased calories are going to come from the consumption of increased calorie dense foods. But why do we eat the increased calorie dense foods? Well, because they taste good. We like the taste of those foods that are high sweet, high fat, and so on. But why do we have that kind of taste? Well, it's because we've been exposed to it. Right? We've had repetitive choices that we've made. We've gone back to the same types of foods. We've been exposed to them over a period of time, and then we have a habit that's developed because of that. But where does that come from? Well, it comes from our appetite. Where does our appetite come from? Well, that comes from our human nature. And why is it that we have a human nature that goes after things that are not healthy and has an appetite for them and leads to this cascade? Well, the cause for that is sin, right? Ultimately, really, if we take any disease process, we're just looking at hypertension now, but if we looked at high cholesterol, or we looked at coronary artery disease, or we looked at stroke, or we looked at heart attack, or we looked at diabetes, or whatever we wanted to look at, you look at any condition and you simply ask the question, what's the cause of that? 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 We will all eventually come back down to the same point. It all begins with sin. It all begins with sin. And what is sin? Well, sin is, the Bible tells us, breaking the law. Right? John tells us in 1 John 3:4, for sin is the transgression of the law. Now, when it talks about transgressing the law, what law is it talking about? Well, it's talking about God's law, right? And what is the foundation of God's law? Well, the foundation of God's law is love. It's his character, right? It's founded on love. Jesus tells us in Matthew 22:37-39, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Right? That's great. And we're also told that the law given upon Sinai was the enunciation of the principle of love, a revelation to earth of the law of heaven. So the law of God is the law of love. If sin is breaking the law of love, and disease is the result of sin, then disease is the result of a love problem. Disease is the result of a love problem. Right? Let that sink in for a while, because we really need to understand that. We are told there's a divinely appointed connection between sin and disease. No physician can practice for a month without seeing this illustrated. If he will be observing and honest, he cannot help acknowledging that sin and disease bear to each other the relationship of cause and effect. So, looking now at cause and effect, let's transition to that, because we're talking about now cause and effect, because we were using cause and effect to reason back to the cause of the effect that we saw, which was hypertension. When we look at the law of cause and effect, we see that every effect must have a cause. Right? There's no effect without a cause. There's always a cause. And every cause will produce an effect. And when we look at it in a timeline standpoint, the cause always comes first. It comes before the effect always comes after, although the timeline between cause and effect can be really fast, like pull the trigger, bullet come out of the gun, right? It can be very quick between the two, but the trigger is always pulled before the bullet comes out of the gun. And if the effect, let's say that it's a disease, if the effect is present, and that is a process, a continuing process, like a disease is, if the effect is present, then the cause must also be present, because the cause must be producing the effect. And why is this important? Why do we need to know this? Because, and this is the point, if you remove the cause, then the effect must go away, because the effect does not produce itself. And that's what I'm interested in. That's why I'm interested in the cause. Because if we understand the cause, then there is a cure for the effect. There's a cure for the effect. The will of God establishes the connection between cause and its effects. Fearful consequences are attached to the least violation of God's law. All will avoid to seek the result, but will not labor to avoid the cause which produced the effect. The cause is wrong, the effect right. The effect is never the problem. And the effect is never bad. I mean, it's never, I shouldn't say bad, it's bad. But it's never wrong. Because the effect simply correctly shows whether the cause was right or wrong. If the cause is wrong, the effect will show that the cause was wrong. If the cause was right, then the effect will show that the cause was right. So you will never find the problem in the effect. You will find the problem in the cause. And that's where we need to go. So, because the law of a cause and effect is the way that it is, then we can consider the laws of thermodynamics associated with this as well. Because the laws of thermodynamics show us that all energy necessary for a system to function must come from where? From outside of that system. Right? So it can't function on its own. It can't produce its own power, its own energy in order to continue its own function indefinitely. That can't happen. There has to be a cause, and the cause has to be outside of the thing. Right? Outside of the thing. So because of the law of cause and effect, you cannot create a perpetual motion machine. Now, there are, if you Google, you'll find that there are perpetual motion machines that are out there. But they're not truly perpetual motion machines. They might be dependent upon gravity, gravitational force, which is outside of itself. That might be dependent upon Earth's rotation in its orbit around the sun, which you don't see and you're not paying attention to, but it's there, and it's a force that's outside that is, helping that thing to move. But as far as some kind of process or some kind of machine or some kind of something that produces its own power and runs by that own power indefinitely, no such thing. Because the cause had to come from outside, the effect is only found inside. Right? So the effect cannot create itself. There has to be a cause that we look for, and the cause has to be outside of whatever system that we're looking at, whatever system we're dealing with. Now, everything that functions by law. Everything that functions functions by law. And the laws that govern function are unchangeable. For example, as a human, we have a law that governs our blood sodium levels, our salt levels in our bloodstream. And that law says that our blood sodium levels are between 135 and 145 milliequivalents per deciliter. That's the concentration of salt in your bloodstream that you should have. And it doesn't matter how tall you are, how short you are, how wide you are, how narrow you are. It doesn't matter. The law governing your blood sodium level as a human being on planet Earth says that healthy is between 135 to 145. And if you start going above that or you start going below that, there's a problem, right? You're going to have progressive dysfunction. Your blood pH is between 7.35 and 7.45. Now, there's been a whole movement in regards to alkaline this and alkaline that and alkaline the other thing, and that alkaline is good and acidic is bad. And in some cases, yes, that's the case. And so if somebody believes that alkaline is good and the more alkaline it is, the better it is, then they might be inclined to take things that add more and more alkalinity to the system and actually alkalinize an individual so that you go above 7.45. But the law that governs the function of your body says that your pH, your blood pH, should be between 7.35 and 7.45. And if you succeed in alkalinizing up to 7.5, 7.55, 7.6, and so on, well, you might think that you're doing yourself a favor and you're going to destroy yourself, you're going to kill yourself in the process. Because if you go above the level of the law, it's going to be destructive. Just as if you go below the level of the law, it will be destructive too. So the law that governs that is unchangeable. You can't change it regardless of what you think about it. If you think that good is outside of the law, you'll find out by the consequences that it's not. Temperature, body temperature is around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Celsius. Perhaps somebody watches a movie about frozen characters that are very cold and so on and live in a very cold environment. And they think, well, that's really cool. I want to live like that. And so they go outside in the winter without much clothes on and they want to live in that freezing cold. Well, it's not going to last very long. Right? And it's not going to do any well. Right? I mean, it's not going to do well for you if you try to do that. Right? Why? Because there's a law that governs your body temperature, and it needs to be within that range. And if you go too low, there's going to be dysfunction. If you go too high, there's going to be dysfunction as well. You can't get away from the laws that govern your function. Right? You can't get away from what you need. It's that fulcrum on the teeter-totter that doesn't move. Right? That doesn't move. Now, you can move those things so that your sodium goes too high or too low, right? That's the teeter-totter going up and down. But what you need to have for proper function, that's not going to change. That won't change. So let's look at this from an analogy of a road, right? We're talking about law, we're talking about health, and on the road. So with this road analogy, on the road, you have health. And in order for you to have health, you need oxygen, you need water, you need food, you need warmth, right? These are various different things that you need in order to be healthy. And when you start getting off the road, then you start noticing that there's problems. So let's say that your temperature starts going up and you start getting up a little bit above the level of your body temperature, right? And the edge of the road is the law, and once you go outside of the law, then you start noticing that there are problems. So your temperature goes up and it goes above the level of the law that governs your body temperature. How do you feel? Well, you don't feel so good, right? You feel hot. Well, there's your symptoms, right? You start having symptoms. The symptoms are there to let you know you're outside of the law. You're off the road. It's like the rumble strips on the side of the road. And what are the symptoms there for? It's to motivate you to do something about it so that you can get back into the confines of the law that governs the function of your body temperature. Now, you could care less about the law, but what you care about is how you feel. And so now you're feeling bad, and the feeling bad motivates you to do whatever you need to do so that you can start feeling good again. And so you do things. If your temperature goes up, well, you start fanning yourself, you turn the air conditioning on, you drink some cold water, take off layers of clothing, whatever it is, so that your temperature can come back down. And once you get down within the confines of the law, then you feel better, and you don't need to keep cooling yourself down anymore. But what happens if you go in the opposite direction? Now your temperature goes down below the level of the law. Well, you're going to have symptoms too. This time you feel cold instead of hot. And that cold, that sensation is there in order to motivate you to do something about it in order to get your temperature back up so that you're within the confines of the law of your body temperature. So you shiver, you cover up, you increase the contact of different parts of the body so that you don't lose as much heat to the surrounding environment. You drink some hot tea, whatever it is, so that you can then get back into the confines of the law that governs your body temperature. And when you do, then it starts feeling better. What's going to happen if you go beyond symptoms? Right? If you don't just stop at the symptoms, the next place that you're going to get to is disease. Right? Instead of just having feelings of things being bad, now things are really going to be bad. Let's say that your temperature is now really going up and you're developing heat exhaustion or heat stroke, and you've got a headache and you're nauseous and you're feeling weak and your temperature is getting really high and it's just, it's miserable. Well, now you're really motivated because you really feel bad so that you really do something about it so that you get back within the confines of the law that governs your body temperature. The farther you go away from the road, the farther you get away from the law, the worse it gets. But that's on purpose in order to motivate you to do something to get back. All right. And in the opposite direction, same thing. If you don't just stop at symptoms when it gets cold, then you're going to end up with disease, frostbite, chilblains, other things that are very painful, very uncomfortable. And that is to motivate you to do something right now about getting your temperature back up, or else things are going to get really bad. Because if you don't stop at symptoms and you don't stop at disease, what's next? Well, it's death in either direction. Right? If you get far enough away from the law that governs the function of your body and the different parts of that function, then you're going to end up at death. Right? And these are cumulative effects. If your oxygen, water, and food is doing well, but your warmth is varying, well, you can handle a farther deviation from the road before you die than if you were dehydrated and malnourished and so on. So if you take multiple hits together, then you can't go as far from the road and still live. Because now you have multiple things that are off the road, and it's that cumulative effect that becomes more and more of a problem. What else did we say that we needed when we were looking at the tree? That's right, we need love. Is it possible that love functions like oxygen, water, food, warmth, and so on? And that if we are functioning, and that there's a law that governs love, and as long as we remain within the confines of that law that governs our love, the function of love, then we're okay. And, we're healthy, it's comfortable, and so on. But when we get outside of that law, then we end up with symptoms and disease and death. Well, yeah, that's the case. That is the case. And there is a law that governs that. And getting outside of that law will result in symptoms and disease and death, even if your water is okay, even if your food is okay, even if your oxygen is okay and your warmth is okay. If the law that governs love is violated, then you can still end up with symptoms, disease, and death just by that itself. That's significant, right? And we need to understand that. So, health is proper function because the law is followed, and disease is dysfunction because the law is broken. Right? So, let's move from this analogy, and now we're going to look at cells and how cells function. You have about 50 to 100 trillion cells in your body. You have about 250 different types of cells, and each different type of cell has different functions. A lot of the functions overlap, but if it's a different type of cell, then there are specific functions or a function that is specific to that particular type of cell that other cells don't have. And cells function kind of like factories, and of course factories will produce a product. Now, in order to produce a product, you have to have raw materials. And the raw materials of the cells, for them to function and be able to produce a product, is your oxygen and your water and your food, your nutrients. It's chemicals, right? Chemicals are the raw materials that your cells use as the fuel in order for them to function. And how are you going to get the oxygen, water, nutrients, and so on to the different cells of your body? Well, that's going to be transported in the blood. The blood is the transporter for that fuel that the cells need in order to function. And you can see then that it is important to have good circulation. If you block the blood flow to particular areas of the body, then you cut off the fuel supply to the cells, and those cells cannot function the way that they're supposed to because they don't get the nutrients, the fuel that they need in order to burn or to use in the process of producing their products and their function. Right. But just like an engine does not just need fuel, it needs something to ignite the fuel. So your cells do not just need fuel, they need something to ignite that fuel, to get it going. So where is it that your cells are going to get the ignition? Where are they going to get the spark from that's going to get this thing going and control its function? You need energy. You have to have power. Remember, the laws of thermodynamics say that all energy necessary for a system to function must come from where? From outside of that system. So where is that power going to come from for it to function? Well, again, it's not the fuel. You can fill the tank, but if all you've done is filled the tank on the car, but you don't have anything to burn it with, then you have no function. So you have to have that energy. You have to have that spark, right? What form of energy do the cells function by? Well, yes, there's chemicals, but it's electricity. The cells regulate the movement of positively and negatively charged particles inside and outside of the cell in order to maintain an electrical balance. And actually, it's an imbalance, and it's a purposeful imbalance. And so you have, it's more negative on the inside of the cell, it's more positive on the outside of the cell. And that difference in charge between the inside and the outside of the cell that is maintained actively through the cell membrane helps with all of the processes that happen in the body. It's really an electrical system. Cells are kind of like batteries. You have charge, and you have voltage, and you have current, and you have resistance, and so on. They function as little electrical units, but you have to have chemicals with it too. So it's an electrical chemical system that works together. But the cells need to be coordinated in their function. You can't just have all these, cells here and cells there doing anything that they want to. They have to be coordinated. So what is it that's going to coordinate the function of all the cells in the body? It's your nervous system. It's the central nervous system. That's where the electrical energy is generated. That's where the spark comes from. That is then going to be what you need in order to help with the function of the body. We're told the influence of the mind on the body as well as the body on the mind should be emphasized. The electric power of the brain promoted by mental activity vitalizes the whole system and is thus an invaluable aid in resisting disease. Right? That's good. So how does the energy from the nervous system get to the cells of the body in order for them to control their function? Well, it comes through the nerves. Right? It's transmitted through the nerves to the various different parts of the body. The mind controls the whole man. Yet many spend all of their lives without becoming intelligent in regard to the casket or the body that contains this treasure. All the physical organs are the servants of the mind, and the nerves are the messengers that transmit its orders to every part of the body, guiding the motions of the living machinery. Right? So it all is controlled through the mind, right? But where does the energy come from where you get the electrical activity in the brain? Remember, the laws of thermodynamics say that all energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside that system. So where is it going to get the energy from? Well, you might say, well, it's from the food that you get. Well, yes, that's the fuel. Where does the spark come from? Right? What is it that initiates the spark? Whatever that is, it has to be outside of the brain. It's outside of the body. It comes from spiritual information, right? Thoughts generate electrical activity in the cortex of the brain, which then transmit through the nerves to the rest of the body. And that spiritual information comes through your spirit to the cortex of the brain. And those thoughts are converted from the spiritual to the physical, which results in electrical impulses that are conducted down the nerves to each of the cells of the body. And that is what regulates the function of the different cells, the tissues, organs, organ systems in the body. And what is the basis of the spiritual information that is needed in order for the mind to be able to control everything well? It's love. It's truth, right? It's love and it's truth that is necessary. That's the basis of spiritual information that's needed in order for all of that system to work properly. If the foundation of the spiritual information that the mind is operating by is lies or error, then that is going to be transmitted through the same pathway to the different cells and parts of the body, and that will result in dysfunction because you were not created to function properly under the influence of lies and error. You were only created to function properly under the influence of truth and love. Right? That's the basis. And so when that gets messed up, it has manifestations in the body. Now, that doesn't mean that the body can't dysfunction from some other standpoint. There are other causes of dysfunction. For example, you can have inheritance. You get the blueprint DNA from a prior generation that gets passed on to you when you're a single cell. And you get half of that genetic material from father and half of that genetic material from mother, and it comes together, and it's the blueprint by which everything in the body is formed and everything is, the function is determined and so on. It comes through that blueprint. And if that blueprint is messed up in a prior generation, well, then it comes to you when you're a single cell, and then that divides into 2 and then to 4 and so on and so forth. And that dysfunction is found in every cell of the body. Every cell of the body has the dysfunction, but not every cell dysfunctions. Why? Because not every type of cell uses every gene and every bit of the DNA. A gene is a specific segment of the DNA that codes for a particular protein, and proteins are used to make up the structure and to determine the function. And so if you have some of the code that's messed up in that particular gene, well, that gene's messed up, but it doesn't mean that all the other genes are messed up. It's that one. And only certain types of cells will use that particular gene in part of its function. And so the only ones that manifest the problem are the ones that use the gene. If it's inheritance, you will not find the problem in one part of a particular tissue or a particular type of cell. because every one of that particular type of cell or particular type of tissue, every cell in that has the dysfunction in it and must manifest it. So, for example, if you have somebody that develops colon cancer in a part of the colon, that's not inheritance. Can't be inheritance. If it was inheritance, it must be throughout the colon that it's manifesting. Somebody has nodules in their thyroid, and they have a little nodule here, and then a nodule there, and a nodule there, and so on, but the rest of the thyroid is okay. That cannot be inheritance, because inheritance must manifest itself throughout all of the cells of a particular type, because all of the cells have the dysfunction in it. So if it's inheritance, and that's the cause of the dysfunction, then you will see it. And you will see it from young, and you will see it throughout all of the cells of a particular type. If it manifests in a particular location within a type of cell, that's not inheritance. Now you can have environment. This is trauma. Pressure's too high, too low, temperature's too high, too low, you burn, you freeze, hammer to wrong nail, And so that's trauma. And trauma, that environment can cause dysfunction in a particular part of the body. I mean, you can take the hammer to one nail and all the other fingers are doing okay. So you can have localized trauma and localized dysfunction. Trauma never creates a new process. All it does is it disrupts the existing structure, and since the structure is messed up, then the function that's associated with that structure gets messed up as well. So trauma can only mess things up. It can never create a new process. So if you have an individual, let's say, for instance, they get cut, and then after that cut is in the healing process, then they start developing a keloid, and the keloid starts growing and overgrowing the area and getting nice and big and everything. Well, that keloid is not an effect of the trauma. Yes, the trauma was there, and that triggered the healing process, but the keloid is actually a result of a dysfunction in the healing process, not actually a problem of the trauma. So these are things that we need to see and understand. Now, you can have a cause because of raw materials, chemicals, right? Because the cells function by chemicals. And so you can have chemicals that are too high concentration, and so you end up with toxicities. You have chemicals that are in too low of a concentration, so you have deficiencies. You can have the wrong chemicals, like poisons or envenomations, which is the wrong chemicals, and that can lead to dysfunction. But chemicals can never create a process. Chemicals can only be used as a part of a process. If you go to the beach and you're walking down the beach and you notice that there's a sandcastle there, what do you conclude? Well, you conclude that the sand made the sandcastle, don't you? Well, no, of course you don't. You conclude that someone used the sand to make the sandcastle. It's not the sandcastle that made itself. Well, similarly with chemicals. Chemicals are like the sand. Chemicals can't create the sandcastle, but if you don't have the chemicals, you can't create the sandcastle. So chemicals, yes, you can have dysfunction associated with chemicals, and they will manifest, and they might manifest in a certain type of tissue first, like if you have not iron deficiency, but if you have iodine deficiency, then you're going to notice that first in the thyroid, because the thyroid cells use iodine the fastest and is most dependent upon it. So if you end up with iodine deficiency, you're going to see it there first. But it'll eventually manifest through the rest of the body. But if it's there in the thyroid, you're going to notice it throughout all of the cells of the thyroid, not just little patches of it. If it's little patches amongst a type of tissue or whatever, then just like inheritance, it can't be the chemicals that cause the problem, right? So we can have dysfunction because of energy. And when I say energy, I mean the mind. That's what I mean. And the mind is regulated quite interestingly. You have different parts of the mind and the brain that are associated with different functions in the body and different parts of the body. And it's the same for everybody. If you want to control your toes, that's in the upper inner part of your brain. And your left toes are going to be controlled by your right brain, and your right toes are going to be controlled by your left brain. But if you want to control your fingers, it's going to be out here. If you want to control your tongue, it's going to be out here, and so on. And it's very well regulated, just like the power company has telephone poles and lines going everywhere, so they know how much electricity you get, right? So it's very well regulated like that. Now, let's say that an individual develops gout, and they have gout in their, in this case, the big left toe, and we would call it podagra in that area. Well, what's the cause of gout? Well, the healthcare community says it's because of uric acid, because if you get a needle and you put it there in the joint and you suck the fluid out, you find out that it has uric acid crystals in it. And the idea is that the uric acid concentrates there, it crystallizes, and then it starts poking into the tissues, and then it causes inflammation and so on, right? But can uric acid be the cause? Well, I argue that no, it can't be the cause. Why? Because of a basic law of diffusion. Diffusion says that a substance that gets into a watery environment must distribute itself evenly throughout that watery environment so that concentration becomes the same throughout that environment. Now, blood is a watery environment. So if you take something and it gets into the bloodstream, well, you're going to have essentially the same concentration throughout the bloodstream. Yes, there's differences. Your arterial system is going to have higher oxygen levels. Your venous system is going to have higher carbon dioxide levels depending on how much of the cells have taken the resources and so on. But in general, you're going to have a similar concentration throughout the cardiovascular system. And if I want to know whether you have gout, then I can send you to the lab and have them draw a blood sample so that we can see what your uric acid levels are. But guess where they don't draw the blood? They don't draw the blood from your toe. They draw the blood from your hand or from your arm. And it doesn't matter if they get it from your left hand or arm or your right hand or arm. It doesn't matter, because where's the uric acid? It's in the blood. And what's the level? It's the same everywhere. If the uric acid levels are the same everywhere, and you have the same uric acid levels going to your left foot as you have going to your right foot, how come you have the problem in the left foot and not the right foot? There has to be something else. Now, somebody might say, okay, well, it's so far away from the heart and so on. Well, there's a joint beyond that, and that one usually isn't affected. And it's in the left foot, but it's not the right foot. Why is it there? There has to be a reason why it's there. It can't be the chemical. Now, yes, the chemical is involved, and if you take a medication like allopurinol that decreases the level of the chemical uric acid, then the manifestation goes away. It's just like having a sandcastle on the seashore, and you pour water all over it until it's dissipated, and now you don't have a sandcastle anymore. But does that mean that the sand built the sandcastle? No. Something else used the sand to build the sandcastle, and that's what is happening here in gout. How does that work? You have a nerve that goes to that joint, and that nerve is attached to another nerve, which is attached to another nerve, which goes all the way up to your cortex in the inner part and middle part of your brain. And if a nerve signal is sent from there all the way down to that location, then it releases chemicals that are picked up by living cells in the area. And those living cells can take in the uric acid and can concentrate it in that joint and spit it out in that joint, and then cause a concentration and a crystallization and then inflammation. And if any time there's inflammation, the immune system is involved. And the nervous system can communicate with the immune system and control it so that inflammation can result. How is it that you end up with a plaque in the artery here and it's not everywhere else? Well, you had the same concentration of cholesterol before the plaque as you did at the plaque as it was after the plaque. It's not just the cholesterol. If it was just the cholesterol, it should be like the whole tube should be lined with the plaque, but that's not what you get. You get this tube that's going woo, and then it goes woo, and then it goes woo again, and so you have that one section that's really blocked. Why is it that one section? Because you have a nerve that goes to that section, and that nerve releases chemicals, and those chemicals are picked up by the immune system. The immune system, some of those white blood cells have been floating around with the extra cholesterol that's been in the bloodstream, and they've been picking it up, and so they have it inside of them, and now they get that signal from the nervous system in that area, and then they go out and they try to get into the wall of the artery to figure out what's going on, and some of them die, and they leave that cholesterol behind. It's the nervous system. There's an interesting study that was done. Researchers were looking at injecting a certain chemical. They were looking at developing, they had a chemical and it was anti-inflammatory, and so they were trying to test it out to see if it could be like the next anti-inflammatory drug, pain medication, and so on, like your next Aleve or ibuprofen or whatever. And so to do the animal testing, one of the tests that they have to do is what's called an intrathecal injection. intrathecal injection. That's an injection into the fluid space that's around the brain so that it can get into the brain area and see what happens if that chemical actually gets past the blood-brain barrier in somebody who takes the medication. And what they noticed in the mice that they were doing this study for is that when they injected this substance in the brain, the mice stopped producing tumor necrosis factor alpha. Now, TNF-alpha, tumor necrosis factor alpha, it's a prominent stimulator of the immune system and the immune response. And inflammatory response. I said immune system, the inflammatory response. But tumor necrosis factor alpha is not produced in the brain. And when they studied the mice, they didn't find any of that chemical in the body. It was only around the brain. So what's going on? How is this happening? Well, after years of investigation, what they discovered is that when they injected that substance around the brain, it changed the signal that was being sent by the nervous system down through the vagus nerve to the spleen. And then from the spleen, that signal was picked up by T helper cells, part of the immune system. The T helper cells went and communicated with natural killer cells, which are the prominent producers of tumor necrosis factor alpha, and the natural killer cells turned off their production of tumor necrosis factor alpha. Oh, interesting. So then they looked at it and they said, I wonder if we can do it without the chemical. So they figured out how to get a nerve stimulator to the vagus nerve and to find the right fibers that go to the spleen, and so that they could get those fibers and stimulate them in a particular way, and they got the same response. By changing the signal that was sent down the vagus nerve to the spleen, they changed the immune system response and they could turn off the production of tumor necrosis factor alpha. Mm-hmm. So the nervous system controls the immune system and how it functions. How do we do that all the time? It's by our thinking. It's by our thoughts, our attitudes, and so on. Cancer. I can't go into all the research related to it, but the research is very clear that every step along the way in cancer development and initiation and progression and metastasis and so on is all influenced by the nervous system. In fact, if you get the nerve that's going to the center of a tumor and you cut that nerve, the tumor changes how it behaves. It's quite interesting. There's a strong relationship between that. And so many patients that I have taken care of, their cancer developed in a time after a significant loss or some major stressor in their life. There's a strong correlation. Now, the last cause is the enemy, right? Here you have Job. He's covered from head to toe with boils. And the boils are not because of bacteria. Now, there's probably bacteria involved in them, but the cause is the enemy. And the enemy is attacking Job for a particular reason, and God is allowing it for a particular reason. And that case is not going to turn around regardless of how much antibiotics you give him or whatever, because that's not the cause. The cause is the enemy. And only when the reason for the attack is reached, then the thing is going to go away. The condition is going to go away. And that's what we see in the Bible. So yes, you can have dysfunction because of inheritance. You can have it because of environment or trauma. You can have it because of raw materials or chemicals. You can have it because of energy, or you can have it because of the enemy. But I'll tell you this, the vast majority of the time, it's right here. It's the mind that is the cause of the disease. And we want to understand that more and how we function. And so when we come to our next session, we're going to be digging in deeper and understanding how that works and what are the issues going on in the mind that are going to lead us to those problems, not just from a physical standpoint, but also as we start looking at mental health and relationships and other things of that nature. So stick with us for the next session as we end up digging deeper and understanding more about ourselves in the law of life, as we turn your world upside down.